So Monday, here comes my wife. Do you need a better and bigger facility for the ladies' lecture? Yes. So we're going to get y'all Con Gymnasium, and we'll leave the basketball up for you. So it is a nice problem to have, and so we're so thankful for everybody who's come to be a part of the lectureship, and we appreciate you so much. Some of you are alumni, so you just have a heart for Florida College like I do. Some of you are visiting maybe because friends have told you you need to come and enjoy the spiritual feast, and we're very thankful to have you as well. And then some are families that may be thinking about Florida College for your kids. And we especially want to offer you a welcome. And if there's anything that we can do to answer questions for you, we would love to do so. We see ourselves as an extension of the home. And there's nothing we want more. And I know you're like me. There's nothing you want more than anything else than for your children to love the Lord and to walk closely by His side throughout their lives. And that's our mission, and that's what we try to do, is we seek to educate the whole person in service to God and the world by imitating Christ. So good to see you this morning. Good morning. Now, the second thing, some of you may be wondering, because I've actually heard this, what in the world is this going to be about? A tent-making preacher. Well, as Dr. Weaver showed you the other night, we're into great ideas and big ideas. We started K through 12 with Fortress, so I'm here to announce that we are hiring preachers to make tents. And we're going to start selling them. We call it Falcon Fabrication. It's another income stream to really try to boost our growth at Florida College. Now, tent-making preacher, and most of you, I'm sure, know this. The idea of a tent-making preacher is just simply somebody who is willing to work outside of the income that may come straight from a church to do what they can to kind of establish themselves financially so that they can serve others and preach the gospel without any hindrance. And they feel comfortable in doing that because they don't have to worry about an income, or it may be just a challenging situation where there isn't the opportunity to have a lot of income there. And we see this in the Apostle Paul when we think about the concept of a tent-making preacher. It is a metaphor that came from his life. And so I want to begin where we see this the first time, and that's in Acts chapter 18. Acts chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. This is Paul in his second missionary journey. All right, he's left Athens, went to Corinth. And here's what the text tells us. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come to Italy with his wife Priscilla because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and he worked with them. And you and I know that he did this to supplement his income, and he did it also because he was one who was seeking to reach the hearts of men. This is not advancing for me, the clicker. I don't know if we need a new battery or something, but I'll let y'all maybe do that in the back. Oh, there it goes. It's operator error. All right. So here's what you see in that text, and Paul's going to repeat this in many of his epistle letters as to why tent making is so important to him. He used it as a means to not just supplement income, but he also used it as a means to help the brethren see some very important lessons that come with the idea of working for others. Now, real quick, we're not that familiar with tent making in this respect. In ancient times, the idea of tent making was very hard work, and it was a learned skill. We don't know where Paul learned it. Did he learn it from his parents? Was his father back in Tarsus a tent maker, and that's where he learned it? We don't know. But we do know that when you look back, especially to the first century, getting a job as a tent maker wasn't like just going to a fast food restaurant and saying, hey, I need to work a few hours. Can you hire me? And they'll hire any and everyone. It was a learned skill. And it was controlled by the trade guild, which meant that you kind of had to have a license or you had to have authorizations and certain principalities to be able to do this. You just didn't go set up shop anywhere you want. The implication when we look at Acts chapter 18 is that more than likely Aquila had the proper licensing or whatever was in place and needed to set up shop. And Paul maybe also having some sort of licensing. We don't know how it all broke down. But Paul was able to join maybe because he had done that work in the past or being a Roman. But nonetheless, don't think of it as just somebody says, hey, I need a little extra cash. I'm going to go get a job at Chick-fil-A for a couple of days. All right? But with Aquila and Priscilla and traveling with Priscilla and Aquila, we see that this became part of who he was. It was an interesting occupation from the standpoint that they would take camel hair, goat hair, and wet it, fabricate it, work it to where it really became waterproof. In Revelation chapter 6, you have a reference to the idea of the sky becoming so dark like it was covered with goat skin. Well, maybe that's that same kind of idea that they're preparing and making a fabric, making something that can serve as a tent to be waterproof. But most of the time, when you think of the idea of tent making, because everybody needed tents and they were in such high demand, a lot of it was patching and mending. And so it was a lot of sewing. So there was always going to be a need. And this is kind of hard for you and I to grasp. Anybody here when you came for lectures, just bring a tent with you this summer? Also doing Airbnb, right? Yeah, there's a pool. Yeah, well, maybe I'll get a lecture, but there's something else going on. Well, that's a different world. And so if you travel, and we're going to travel for a long period of time, a tent may be something that you definitely want or need. And so that's what people did. And so it served Paul very well. And when you think of it, in Paul's idea and the way he talks of it with respect to in the churches, is that Paul is going to say, I didn't just do it to make money. I want you to hear just a few of the things and the reasons why Paul felt the need to make tents. In Acts 20 and in verses 33 to 34, as he's speaking to the elders of Ephesus, he reminds them, I coveted no one's silver or gold or clothing. You yourselves know that these hands of mine have supplied my own needs, and not just my own needs. I've supplied the needs of my companions. What's interesting, that's in that same discord where he says it's more blessed to give than receive, as he quotes Jesus. It was more blessed for me to give and provide for myself and others. And I wanted to be a blessing in that way. Speaking of being a blessing to the brethren at Thessalonica in 1 Thessalonians 2:9, he says, remember, brethren, remember my labor and my toil. We worked night and day that we might not be a burden to any of you as we proclaim the gospel of God. A little later in the second letter, he says, for you yourselves know how you ought to imitate us, because we were not idle when we were with you, nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it. But with toil and labor we worked night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. We did this not because we did not have the right to such help, but in order to offer ourselves as a model for you to imitate. So I want you, it's kind of reason upon reason now. I didn't want to be a burden, and apparently this was an issue, not just with Corinth, but maybe even with Ephesus, as he spoke to the elders there. Now to Thessalonica, there seems to be a prevailing idea. We didn't want to be a burden to you. We knew it might be an issue for you to all of a sudden be providing for all my needs, even though I have a right to do it. But I also want you to know I didn't want to be a burden, but I also said, hey, why don't you watch what I do? Maybe somebody come into Paul and go, Paul, hey, I would love to be more involved. I would love to be more involved in work here, but I got this job that's keeping me busy all week. I'd love to be more hospitable. I know you've been talking about it and showing us what the saints did in Jerusalem right after they became Christians and how they were in each other's homes. I would love to do that, but I got this job. And Paul's going to go, and? And? You saw me in the market. Saw me down there. And then he makes this point to the church in Corinth. And if you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, this is actually his big sermon on this idea of not being a burden, but also reminding the brethren why they should be supporting preachers. And you have that analogy, don't muzzle the ox, that comes from the Old Testament. Don't make the ox just grind all the grain and not let him eat some of it. And preachers, you don't just make them work and work and work without enjoying some of the fruit that you can give them. But here's what he says: instead of being an obstacle to you, and an obstacle for the growth of the gospel here with you, what did I do? I provided for myself. And here's what he says at the end of that exhortation: that I may present the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my right in the gospel. And then he repeats it again in 2 Corinthians 11:9, that I could offer the gospel free of charge. Can I just make a quick point? This is, I think, very important. You know what we get to do? It's amazing. We get to speak for God. What do you think about that for a moment? How many people would you let go speak for you? Yeah, just go represent me. You tell them how I feel. You just tell them, hey, just, you could say, no, come out. That's a very short list. My wife. That's about it. Yeah. God lets us share his love, share his story. God lets us be the ambassadors. And Paul says, whether you pay me or don't pay me, that's an amazing privilege, and I'm going to do it. So if I can just say this before I get into this, because I know some of you are like me, you have supplemental income, you're also providing your own ways, and I recognize the challenge that comes with that. And it may be you've had some challenging situations. And I implore you just to listen to your brother Paul. So what? I'll do it. I need to speak for God and share the gospel. And so Paul's point is free of charge. Free of charge. Now, if we can just summarize it real quickly. I want you to see and understand that for Paul, the purpose of tent making, the purpose of tent making was the idea that it was a great way to supplement his income. All right. I need to provide for myself. It was also a great way to connect with outsiders. He certainly does that. But it was also a great way to show the brethren, here's how you work. And here's something to think in mind. If Paul made a tent, think it's a good one? Absolutely. If Paul worked in your shop, if he's working for Aquila and Priscilla, don't you imagine he was an amazing worker, right? And if Paul also was making tents, and Paul also was in your shop, don't you think he was making a powerful impression upon everybody else that was there? Yes. Yes. Just like he talks to us all in Ephesians chapter 6, that we work mightily to the Lord. So it was a powerful way for Paul to actually preach without preaching. It was his example. But you could also look at it this way for Paul. It was the idea that Paul could, here we go. It was a great way to travel without worry. It was also a great way to assist his fellow workers. You remember the first passage we read there? That I not only provided for my own needs in Acts 20, but I also provided for the needs of my companions. I have a way to provide, and I'm going to do it for others. And it was certainly a great way to build up relationships and trust. And if we go back to 1 Corinthians 9, going back to 1 Corinthians 9, that passage that I said, all right, here's don't muzzle the ox. Here's this great example of how Paul says he not only works as a tent maker, but why he also says the church should support one another. His summation of all that was this: I do all things, and I become all things to all men, that I may by some means have a part in saving some. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? I want us to pause for just a moment and recognize that really from a historical point of view, this is what we see at tent making. And it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor that's carried over today. That men who work in a secular job but also preach the gospel or share the gospel, They are tent makers. But I want to jump from the historical, if you allow me for a moment. I want to go to the personal. Just speak up from my own point of view. When the Bible faculty came to me, they could have gone to anybody, especially the guys on campus. But my heritage is like some of you. I grew up hearing the stories about preachers getting paid with eggs and chickens. You remember those? Now, frankly, if anybody wants to pay me with eggs today, I'm good with it. Right now, I'll go ahead and tell you what are eggs, $25 a dozen right now? And if they're free-range homeschool chickens, they're about $45. Yeah, I'm gonna play with eggs. Let's get back to that, the chickens. But I remember hearing the stories. I remember the stories like J.D. Tent. J.D. Tent, Texas preacher. I grew up in West Texas, so you heard these stories. In 1983, after 3 years of preaching, J.D. Tent was paid for the first time. He received a total of $9.75 for the year, 5 of which he got for performing a wedding. You adjust that to today's inflation. Oh, well, $9.75 could have been a lot back then. Yeah. Adjust it to today's money, it would be like $312. Probably should have preached more on that 1 Corinthians 9, don't muzzle the ox. If you've ever read the story, then as he preached on denominationalism, but his point was just like Paul's. I will preach. His grandson, David Tent, many of us know, says this quote, speaking of his granddad in this concept. We need to be totally committed to the gospel, regardless of the cost or the pay. And that's true. And these are the shoulders that we stand on. Well, I want us to kind of think about something here. It's really only been in the last 100 so years, probably even less, that men have been fully supported and their families fully supported by churches to preach the gospel. And really, if you think about it, even back in ancient times, I mean, it wasn't like Elijah was getting a lot of money. Jesus and his disciples were supported by the women, if you remember. And they relied on the generosity of brethren. And that's something I think we need to keep in mind, and we need to really think about that before we get too upset. Now, I'm going to talk about some things here in a moment about churches and providing for preachers. But we're standing on these shoulders. We're standing on the shoulders of those who went before us. Now, to just make this real personal for just a moment, for Cheryl and I, we both grew up in West Texas, all right? So my dad, and I remember this so vividly, my dad had a full-time job, different jobs, but on Sundays he would drive to Morton, Texas. He'd go to the west side and Lubbock and preach, and I can remember getting up real early with him because every now and then he would drive to Spur, Texas. All right, anybody know where Spur, Texas is? There's only 2 people in here. Oh, yeah, you know where Spur, Texas is. Yeah. Have you ever heard the phrase, "We're in the Dickens is Dickens"? Well, here it is. I know where Dickens is. You go to Dickens and then go south about 30 miles, but it's about, about an hour and a half from Lubbock. And I'd get up real early with my dad, and we would drive all the way out to Spur, Texas, and sit in that little church and enjoy the hospitality of brethren. But there was a cotton farmer by the name of Van Cash. He and his wife Tookie, they worked mainly with that congregation for many, many, many years. He was a cotton farmer, and that was predominantly it around West Texas, unless you got in the city where there was more, you might say, health within the congregation, financially supported guy. It was just very common that most preachers had secular jobs, and whether you were a cotton farmer, that's work. All right? My wife Cheryl, her dad, would get his family up real early, and they would drive from North Alabama way out in the sticks of Tennessee to a place called Shoal Bluff. They would load up all 3 of the girls, put them in the back of the VW bug, and they would drive all the way up to Shoal Bluff, and it was a little place from antiquity because it had this amazing bathroom called an outhouse. And that's what you did. Can I just share with you, those are formative moments children need to be in uncomfortable situations to teach and learn and understand service. Our dads didn't do it for the pay, obviously. But it was an opportunity to teach, and I think they were teaching us as much as they were teaching the brother. So when Cheryl and I got together, we both had college degrees. We were blessed with good jobs. She was working as a dietitian. I was working in the news business. We thought, we can do this. That was our plan. That's what we did for 13 years. It was kind of interesting. Started out in Dothan, a little place called Apple Tree Street. We moved up to North Alabama, and I wasn't really looking to preach. I took a job first, and then we were just going to visit around. But we went into this congregation for the second time, and you ever been just a little bit late to services, so you're trying to sneak in the back? That's right. So we were just kind of sneaking in the back. This was in Albertville, Alabama. We're sneaking back, sitting down, and anybody here know Lewis Garrett? Lewis Garrett was the preacher there, and he'd been there for 6 years. He'd been driving over from Huntsville to preach. He saw us sneak in the back. He literally stopped class and said, "Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I'll let you know that Phil and Cheryl are back with us." And I kind of scouted them out and done some little research. And as far as I'm concerned, he's going to preach for you next week, and he'll be your preacher from now on. And I want to thank you for 6 years. I do not exaggerate any of that. I was like, did I just hear that? And I looked over my wife, and her jaw is on the ground. That's what I heard. And so, hey, we're back into preaching. And then we went from there down to Melbourne, and we're blessed. And we worked with the congregation down there. It just seemed to happen. It was a great blessing for us. All right? Wasn't exactly for the reasons of Paul, but hey, that's what we wanted to do, and we were really blessed. And the only reason we didn't continue to do that is that my job commanded so much of my time, 60 plus hours as well as preaching. And I'm one of these preachers that I just don't want to speak. I want to evangelize. I got to get in homes. I want to be fully invested. That's what Cheryl and I want to do. That with Dad working full-time at the TV station, pretty much full-time at church, and we got 2 young kids at home, I got to make a choice. All right? And I could have chosen either one. Both would have been fine choices as far as we were concerned. But now that the kids are out at home, all right, we can do that again. All right? So that's what it was like for us. And that's why we made those. We're not like Paul. And I'm definitely not like Brother Tim. Okay, so I'm not saying that at all. But there are some blessings that come with that. There's also some limitations that come with that. And that's what I want us to get into now, because what I've seen, and you just bear with me for a moment. I want you to share some observations. This is not commentary. This is observations in the brotherhood today. We seem to have more and more churches with 2+ preachers. Not a commentary. If it's my congregation as an elder, and I'm going to do whatever I can to provide for the sheep, and yes, that's great. But 30 years ago, you didn't have that. Would that be fair? Okay? That's fine. That's good. But I think we're also seeing a lot of people drive by smaller congregations going to larger congregations for numerous reasons. Maybe they got more kids. Maybe they got more teaching opportunities. Maybe whatever. But we're seeing that. Okay? We're seeing that. And maybe some are driving past smaller congregations for a very good reason. Or maybe it's just a smaller congregation because there's nothing else around it. I have a dear friend who's leaving a multiple preacher situation to go work with a smaller church that's out on its own, and I commend him for that. But I think we're also seeing that the cost of living is definitely going up. A lot. First elders meeting I remember going to, I was blessed to be a part of the preacher training program where the elders were very, very instructive, and they invited me to all their meetings, so I just knew a lot of things, and the preacher there and I were very, very close, so I knew his salary. So this is the mid-'80s. Salary of about $50,000, which is pretty good mid-'80s. Okay? No other benefits, all right? It wasn't like you had health insurance and you had, but if you were to take that 50,000 from 88 and just go with the cost of living all the way up to today, that same salary would be equivalent today to $147,000. Now think about that. Not too many guys, not too many families are being supported that much. Now again, no commentary. This is not a commentary. Just an observation. And then, I think it would be safe to say, this is just from my own view, we don't have as many preachers today. We don't have as many men coming in to Florida College wanting a Bible degree because they want to preach. We're working on it. We're teaching. We're encouraging. We have an amazing crop of young women who are certainly godly and studying, and others, but it's not quite like what it was from the standpoint that more men wanted to preach. All right. And so as a result, just my opinion, now, this is opinion from the observation, there may be a need for more tent makers. And it may not be just somebody who comes out of school wanting to preach. It may be that we have men who are blessed in whatever profession that they are in to say, I can do more in the kingdom. And to use that blessing and take it a step further. Yeah, I can be an accountant, I can be this, I can be whatever during the week, but then I can preach the gospel and work, my wife and I can work together in the kingdom to help some of these places. I want to transition now to what I hope is just a little bit insightful for you, and then I'm going to open it up briefly for just some conversation to hear your thoughts. I went and talked to just a handful of men that I knew were in this situation, and I just wanted to grab their thoughts so that I could share it with you, that you're not just listening to me, okay? So I'm just going to share these with you. These were their thoughts. I will tell you that being bivocational for the past 3 years, it's been difficult for me, but I don't see myself going back to full-time preaching. And y'all know what he means by full-time preaching, only being supported by the church. Pro number one, there is financial freedom. My salary and having a place to live doesn't depend upon upsetting the wrong church member. I've never had a bad experience personally. I've never had my job threatened, but there is pressure in being in that situation, especially as a younger preacher. I definitely erred on the side of not upsetting anyone, especially the head elder or primary family. You kind of walk on eggshells. Pro number two, I feel better close to the community where I am now. Dealing in sales and customer service, I regularly interact with the public. And I know that has an added flavor, and it certainly has added flavor to my preaching and has opened doors for an evangelistic opportunity, and I think the brethren view you differently. Pro three, some respect you more because you work a real job. My name's Phil Robertson, so I actually had a guy at a church once get up and say, hey, Phil Robertson is here tonight, but it's not the real Phil Robertson. Preaching is a job. It's a real job. It's a real job. But we understand what he's saying. But some people respect you more, that you have a real job. It's not just one day a week, and they recognize your work ethic. All right, here's another observation. Full support just doesn't mean what it used to. If a man intends to have a family and provide, a day job may become necessary. Congregations are getting smaller as evangelism has gotten harder to navigate in our society. And what creates insult to injury is when younger families leave smaller groups for larger ones. It really wasn't a choice for me. I had insurance provided through a brother at the church, but when that changed, and I hoped it would only be temporary, it became permanent. And then when COVID happened and the economy got worse, I had to get a full-time job and I had to keep it. It became permanent. It's more productive really though for me because I've learned better time management. I'm way better than I was before, and I just live every day as if I'm 8 to 9 hours behind, and I don't waste time. There's several pros to working outside of full-time ministry. There's a financial benefit besides just a better salary. I also have a company car, vehicle, gas card, health insurance, and retirement. It provides me with also other opportunities to share the gospel. The cons are limited, but I do have to give up some time that I wish I could spend in ministry, so I just choose at times to sleep less. Next guy. I was working with a smaller congregation receiving outside support. It became a struggle to maintain that support. So we were forced into tent making. I found that it's easier to acquire support than it is to maintain it. So a decision had to be made to either move or make tents. We felt like the work in this location was very important and was needed, so we decided to stay, and I got a secular job that would not interfere with kingdom work. The pros, you're less burdened on the churches. You can work in areas where there's a greater need. You have financial independence, all right? And people relate to you sometimes better in this situation. The con, you're not as able to devote as much time maybe to and energy to kingdom work. And there's also anxiety, a little more anxiety. My secular work was so demanding along with preaching, I ended up having a stroke. My doctor told me to change or die. He's still with us. That is good. But you can understand. Next guy, I previously drove a school bus, which was very helpful and assisted in my work. Driving a school bus provided full-time benefits and part-time hours that were required, and it also gave me time to set up Bible studies during the day. I'm currently now working with Christian Academy, and I have the great opportunity to teach Bible class all day. And I have 20 students with me all day, and I never had that opportunity as a preacher before, so I'm loving this. I had hoped also to preach in the area, and so I'm working now with a smaller church as well as working at the academy. And I would not have been able to financially do either one of those jobs if I didn't have them both together. And then this last. I enjoy the financial freedom. I don't hesitate to preach on what I think needs to be preached on or to address what needs to be addressed. I have less fear of what happens if they're offended. I enjoy taking some of the financial burden off the church so that they have more funds available for benevolence and evangelism. My salary doesn't hold the church hostage. They don't have to stress about raises or keeping up with inflation. I think of me not only being available I think that it's also created opportunities for some of the brethren to step up when they normally may not have before. I think it's made us stronger. Definitely less of a preacher-pastor orientation. I'm not a one-man show. So I just wanted to share those with you so you would hear it more than just coming from me. Just out of curiosity, anybody here this morning what you would consider yourself to be a tent maker preacher? Right this morning? Oh, thank you. There's 3 of us. Well, it's a blessing. It's a blessing if you're fully supported. All right? Conversation. I'll open a conversation here for a couple of minutes before I give some concluding remarks. Anybody got any thoughts, ideas? Yeah.
Because when I was growing up, I thought that's the calling.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see it for those I was under it as not a person of money. It's just like God called them
Yeah.
to preach the gospel, and it was like. And then my second father died because of a preacher had a pay. Because from my understanding, the tithe supposed to be a support for the administration of the church. That's meaning they should get that.
Yeah.
And compensate
Yeah.
per se. But I think preacher is a calling.
Yeah. Well, I think there is, let me just say it like this, Josette. Josette's one of our Valricans. I'd love to hear her say, "Pay the preacher." All right. So, but I think all of us have a call. I think all of us have been called. If you're a minister of the gospel, you feel that burden. You feel that burden that regardless of am I paid or am I not paid, I'm going to preach. I'm going to preach. Calling is just simply the idea of a vocation. It's the idea of being called to service. And I would hope that all of us would feel that way. But thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I wonder if you could speak to this. I know some gifted young men that are very good public speakers, and they are committed to being a tent maker, preacher. And I think, especially among the generation behind mine, there's some disappointment in them
Well, it's hard for me not to be a smart aleck since it's my first inclination. Because when somebody says, hey, you need to do this, I said, I'll be right behind you. When you go, I'll go. Let's go together. All right. Quit that job. And let's not take the boat out anymore. Let's sell it. Hey. That's my first thought. I can't say that, so I hope it's not recorded anymore. But here's an example in Scripture. And now this is opinion. Okay? I think it does any young man a lot of good not to go straight into full-time preaching. It's my opinion. I'm not discounting it. It's my opinion. It did me a lot of good. You learn how to work. You learn how to sweat. You learn to know exactly what it feels like on a Wednesday night when people come in their scrubs and they're covered in grease. They're covered in the burdens of you. And you, instead of going, who are these people? When they walk in the door, you go. So glad you're here. You get it. I think it's a benefit. And I think we need to be careful as brethren that we don't put burdens on other people that we're not willing to put on ourselves. Because it does take a lot of courage to rely on brethren. Now, let me just say this. One of the reasons I wasn't really quick to run into full-time preaching, I grew up in the 80s. And I grew up with a huge fear of being written up. I grew up with a huge fear of somebody getting upset with me. And I need to be careful about what I preach. I know. But it did have its trepidation with me. All right? And so it was easier just to provide for my own and work. So I would say don't discourage the young men. Applaud them. And hopefully they'll use all their time, talent, and treasure in service to the Lord. They're all three needed. All right? So, yes, sir.
I think that we need to encourage some older men who are retired to use their retirement years in small congregations and afford heaven.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, we kind of need to, it's serious. We need to think about what does it really mean to pick up your cross and follow me. All right? Prosperity, let's just be honest. Prosperity is not our friend. Prosperity is not our friend. And we just need to be careful of that. Let me just conclude it with this. Oh, oops, is it already taken off? All right. Can you help me that back? So I thought you wanted to show my last slide and it would come back for me. Some advantages and disadvantages real quick. Advantages and did I click through it? Did I do that? Did I mess it up? Oh, there it goes. All right. Some advantages to tent making. An unchallenged salary. You got insurance. You got retirement benefits. You're an example to the brethren. And you have evangelistic opportunities. All right. Some disadvantages. All right. Disadvantages. Thank you, guys. Thank you very, very much. Go ahead and advance it for me if you can in the back. I think this clicker's childproof. All right, some disadvantages. Disadvantages. Study time is limited. Brethren may not be picking up the slack. Family obligations can be neglected. And to some degree, while evangelism can be greater when you're in a secular job, it can also be limited when you're in a secular job, just how you use it. Is it going to advance? Is it not going to make it? Okay. Real quick, here's what we've done at Valrico, all right? Here's what we've done at Valrico in our current situation. Cheryl and I, we want to see ourselves as more than just Sunday workers. Does that make sense? And I know we're all, if you're a preacher, you're not just a Sunday worker. But we want to be very, very, very heavily involved in evangelism and greeting brethren and helping build up the brethren. But if you got a job throughout the week, it's hard to get all that. So we have an evangelism team in place that's helping us greet, meet, and follow up. All right. I also have some shepherds that are getting so organized. They are amazing at following up with all the sheep. So I'm not into sheep herding. All right. My job is to catch them, they clean them. So and so that's where I focus our attention on those who are seeking, and we're seekers of seekers. They take them and help them grow and really focus on that. We have a person who's helping me with evangelism. It's a kind of a part-time position just to make sure, and he and I meet regularly, and we stay in touch on who's studying with who and how things are going. And then we're also blessed with another gentleman who's helping take care of our older generation. So I don't have to run to every hospital visit. Not that I don't want to, all right? But I need to focus here, and this fella takes care of that. It does kind of scare the older folks when I do show up. They go, "Oh, we're really that bad?" No, you're good. You're good. You're good. But we have that in place, all right? But let me just close with this then. Let me just close with this. This is my advice to all preachers and their wives, all right? Cheryl and I are a team. Cheryl and I are a team, all right? And so our first obligation and focus is our kids. Win your first mission field. Win your first mission field. Don't go save the world and lose your kids. So that's how we made decisions. That's how we made decisions. If we're not wanting to be a burden to the churches, okay, that's our goal. Don't be a burden to the churches. Then you need to have insurance, health insurance. You need life insurance. And when you get to a certain age, you need long-term care insurance. Again, I know I'm going opinion on you here. But there's no reason for us not to provide that. And if that is an issue, you need to talk to your elders, or you need to think about, what do I need to do to provide these things? You also need to be thinking of retirement. Compounding interest is your best friend. Start young. Don't be a burden to the churches later. You start planning for retirement. Get a financial advisor. Think about things. Listen to what Paul's saying just in the spirit of it. I don't want to be a burden to the churches. Don't be a burden to the churches, all right? Don't be a burden to the churches. Ponder the path of your feet, then all your ways will be sure, all right? God bless you. God bless you in any way that you're serving, any way that you're serving. And if we do have more tent-making preachers, that's great. Let's hold them up and let's do the work. And it's an amazing work that we get to do. God bless y'all. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Oh, hey, thank you.
Somebody's makeup? Okay. Where do you want it? Over this side? How far?
That's good.
Like
That's
this?
good. Yeah. Kathleen, is this far enough over? Further back, angled like that. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Need any more help?
No, good. Thank you.
Okay.